how did you first meet Trump? When did you actually lay eyes on him and have a conversation with him?
The first time that I interviewed him was November of 2014. I was covering what ultimately became the Republican primary field for the Daily Beast at the time. And I was writing a piece about casinos in Atlantic City about Chris Christie, who was about to run for president himself. And I decided to interview Trump about one of his casinos there closing down. And I remember at the very end of the interview thinking, almost out of I felt like I needed to be polite and ask him if he was thinking about running for president in 2016. But I didn't really give a shit. And I didn't think that he really would, because he'd been pretending to run for president at that point for decades. And it was like he was waiting for me to ask it, and then he acted totally surprised by the question. He was like, "Oh, yeah, well, 2016." I'm paraphrasing. He was like, I'm thinking about it. I'm looking at it. And, he gave this answer that said basically, if the country is still going to shit in a couple months, then maybe I'll do it. And I remember asking my editor at the time, should we even bother to write this up? And she was like, yeah, I guess. And so, we wrote it up in this very, very skeptical way. Like, he's thinking about it again. He always is thinking about it. And then a couple months later, he came down the escalator. And I've been, on that beat ever since.
How did you find him in that first interview?
He was exactly as I expected. He just kept repeating. I think he repeated it like 10 times in a fairly short interview. I made a lot of money in Atlantic City. And he said, I want you to say in your article, Mr. Trump made a lot of money in Atlantic City. And then he got out like before it collapsed. But he made a lot of money. And so I wrote verbatim, Mr. Trump said, I want you to say Mr. Trump said. And I remember getting some feedback that he was a little irritated that I quoted that verbatim.
Of course he would be.
But
that's part of your style, though, right? It's to lay it all out, including the stuff that happens before and after an interview. You notice people's expressions.
Yeah. And he was exactly as you would expect, and he got kind of wistful, though. He was like, oh, if I could have had you there in Atlantic City back when we first opened the Taj Mahal, which is the casino we were talking about, you would have had so much fun. You would have thought it was this and that. He was a little, he seemed a little sad. I was surprised by his capacity for introspection, I remember, during that interview, because I figured it was like 0. And so the fact that it was like 0.5, I was surprised by.
Well, how was he introspective?
He just seemed kind of wistful, and there was a audible sadness in his voice, and
about the good old days.
Yeah, about the good old days and this casino closing, and
when he was hanging out with the mafia bosses in the back.
Yeah,
and
Michael Jackson, and
breaking the law consistently, right? I mean, how many times did they get sort of,
and stiffing all sorts of contractors.
Yeah.
But it was a totally unremarkable exchange with him.
And you weren't sort of compelled by this personality or this person?
No, I thought it was great. It was exactly what I needed for the piece I was writing. It was like he was the perfect transitional villain for this piece that I was writing about this casino. And so I was happy, as a journalist, I remember being very happy about it. But I didn't think, well, I'm probably going to spend the next 6 years of my life contemplating this man.